and the sweat of their labors, toils of the brave which have brought results.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Bianca Collins. I'm the curator of public programs for the Fowler Museum at UCLA. Thank you for joining us today or tonight, depending on where it is you're tuning in from around the world. The Fowler is honored to present today's program, Beloved Ghana, as part of our Curator's Choice series, where we join curators for lively conversations about their passions and projects that inspire audiences to engage with different worldviews and find joy in the multiplicity of human experiences. Today, Betsy D will offer a brief introduction to the exhibition and selected works that speak to the diversity of imagery that define Akoto's style in How Do You See This World? The Art of Almighty God. Then Kevin Gaines and Raymond Silverman will discuss a selection of paintings by Akoto that express his affection for his Asante heritage, his pride for his homeland, beloved Ghana, and more broadly, how such patriotism is manifest among Ghanaians today. They will also explore Akoto's fascination with the history of the United States, especially its presidents, and the important role Africans in the diaspora played in shaping the Pan-African movement in Ghana and beyond. Kevin K. Gaines is the Julian Bond Professor of Civil Rights and Social Justice at the University of Virginia, with a joint appointment in the Corcoran Department of History and the Carter G. Woodson Institute for African American and African Studies. He is the author of The African American Journey, A Global History, forthcoming in 2023 from Oxford University Press. His current book project, The World the Civil Rights Movement Made, argues that internal tensions within the movement and among African Americans gave rise to subsequent thought and activism that envisioned expansive democratic conceptions of human rights and Black liberation. Raymond Silverman, a historian of the visual cultures of Africa, is Professor Emeritus of the History of Art, African Studies, and Museum Studies at the University of Michigan. His research and writing have explored historical and contemporary visual practices in Ethiopia and Ghana, and museum and heritage discourse in Africa. Silverman's recent work has focused on the visual culture of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in the 20th and 21st centuries, resulting in his book, Ethiopian Church Art, Painters, Patrons, Purveyors, 2022. He also published National Museums in Africa, Identity, History, and Politics in 2022. Betsy D. is guest co-curator of How Do You See This World? The Art of Almighty God, and former director of education at the Fowler Museum. She has authored publications and articles on the teaching of world arts and humanities, was a contributing author to Wrapped in Pride, Ghanaian Kente and African American Identity, and curated a number of African art exhibitions at the Fowler, including Mandela for President, South Africa Votes for Democracy, and Yards of Style, African Print Cloths from Ghana. Quigg also served as project director and co-curator of African Print Fashion Now, a story of taste and globalization. Before we get going, I have just a few quick technical bits of housekeeping. Once the screen sharing begins, I encourage you to click view options and select side-by-side mode so the video feed doesn't cover any of the presentation. And if you have any questions during our program, we encourage you to submit them through the Q&A function found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can submit and upvote entries that you would like to be considered to be answered at the end of the program. All right, that's all from me. Over to you, Betsy.
Thank you. Thank you, Bianca, for your introductions. I am delighted to host today's program presented in conjunction with How Do You See This World? The Art of Almighty God. The exhibition features 80 paintings by Ghanaian artist Kwame Akoto, born in 1950. In Kumasi and is drawn from the Fowler's collection and institutional and private loans. It was initially curated by former Fowler director and preeminent African art scholar, Doran H. Ross, and after his passing in 2020, the Fowler's African arts curator, Erica Jones, and I brought the project to fruition. The works I am showing are included in the exhibition, and the context shot of Almighty's studio is courtesy of Dr. Silverman. All other images of artist studios in Kumasi that I show are by Mr. Ross, and his complete archive is now in the Getty Research Institute, Los Angeles. Kwame Akoto, master painter, educator, chorister, evangelist, and proprietor of Almighty God Artworks in Kumasi, the capital Okay, excuse me, I'm sorry. I just lost my, oh boy, I just lost my text. Forgive me.
Betsy, if you reduce the size of your Zoom screen, I think you'll be able to see it again.
Okay, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I have just lost it.
If you reduce your screen size, the Zoom screen size, it will reveal the windows underneath, Betsy, where your text was.
Okay, I've got it. Forgive me.
All right. Let's get your camera back on.
Okay. Okay, so we're on, let's go to slide 2, Ray. Okay, I'm very sorry. Kwame Akoto, master painter, educator, chorister, evangelist, and proprietor of Almighty God Artworks in Kumasi, the capital of the Asante region in South Central Ghana, is one of the most prolific artists in West Africa. He heads one of the largest painting workshops in the city, renowned for its thriving scene of street painters. The sprawling open-air studio workshop training center, his shop as he calls it, is the site of apprentices working on assignments under his direction, and of Almighty himself actively engaged in the production of works of art. Notice in these two Kumasi studios the variety of imagery, political personalities, sports heroes, religious icons, and hair salon and barbershop signage. Initially, his studio focused on commercial arts, signs for small businesses, cloth banners for evangelical events, portraits on tin for grave monuments, and memorial t-shirts for funerals. As the production of signage has become more digital, Almighty, as he is known to friends and patrons, now devotes more of his time to what he calls creativity art, works not intended as advertising and produced primarily for an international clientele. These address an array of subjects, from Christian themes and homages to Ghana to visual textual essays on world problems and visions of demons, the devil, and hell. Often highly personalized, as on the left, they also reveal Almighty's keen awareness of global problems. When he shifted to creativity art, he did not leave sign writing behind, often citing extensive text on the frames or the paintings themselves. This interplay of verbal and visual is characteristic of the arts of the Akan-speaking peoples of southern Ghana. Most distinctive are the commentaries Almighty includes about life, the process of painting, and his notion that paintings can explain themselves. On the left, the existential proclamation, "Thank God I was not created a leaf," and on the right, a paint palette lamenting its weight, imploring Akoto not to add more paint. Almighty's evangelical faith is front and center in his life, and he considers painting an essential part of his daily ministry. He goes to choir practice once a week and never misses a Sunday service, taking note of biblical passages that subsequently stimulate new works. Ghana's population of 22 million is approximately 71% Christian, and of those, nearly 31% are evangelicals. The lattice structures in the Fowler's exhibition are a nod to his workshop, and the salon-style hanging of works mirrors their display at his studio. The exhibition features 7 painting clusters. Their ever-evolving tropes illuminate the artist's most closely held values, his spirituality, his proud Asante heritage, and his belief that his paintings will change the world. Self-portraiture and self-reflection play a significant role in defining Almighty's status as a Christian and in his declarations of being born again. Some of these paintings reflect his longing to improve himself and those around him. A subset depicts eyes, mouths, or ears each focused on the all-seeing God. Works in the human condition section provide commentary on global issues and more personal ones affecting families and friends. They serve as framing devices for social, economic, medical, and political concerns that plague the planet and Ghana in particular. The I Will Stop Smoking series arises from the artist's former habit, which he came to view as unhealthy and sinful upon his conversion to Christianity. Almighty's first work in this series, painted in 1993, featured Joe Camel, the logo mascot of Camel cigarettes, and was a response to the 1991 report on tobacco companies targeting young consumers. Depicting a range of cigarette smoking flora and fauna, Akoto believes strongly that this series has changed lives. Visions of Hell present a panoply of sinister figures, including local witches and wizards and the water spirit and temptress Mamiwata, perhaps Almighty's most enduring symbol of evil. In calling out the demons at the root of social ills, he also directs his viewers to renounce these forces, as Almighty himself is trying to do. On Death and Mourning includes some of the most poignant and personal images in the exhibition. Funerals, whether Christian or otherwise, are especially elaborate events in Akan Asante culture. Two works in the Kwame Akoto and Doran H. Ross section close the exhibition with a tribute to the artist's long professional relationship with Doran Ross, posthumous curator of the exhibition and former director of the museum. Their friendship of nearly 3 decades profoundly shaped their lives and work, and Ross's passing was significant in this project's completion. Akoto created 2 praise portraits as a final tribute to his friend. Utilizing a paint palette, the artist superimposed this extraordinary rendering of Mr. Ross on a portrait of himself with the words, "We mourn Brother Doran Ross. The art world mourns, even palettes, paintings mourn." I return now to the section Beloved Ghana, the topic of which we speak today, which honors Almighty's affection for his country and his Asante heritage. Roughly half of Ghana's population of 22 million are of Asante origin and live in South Central Ghana. Akoto employs recognizable symbols to express his pride, from the red, green, and gold of the Ghanaian flag to iconic political figures such as Kwame Nkrumah and Kofi Annan, to Asante kings and queen mothers dressed in classic kente cloth. On the occasion of Obama's visit to Ghana in 2009, painters celebrated the occasion in portraiture, often portraying the president alongside beloved Ghanaian leaders. Such images, I would argue, emerge from Ghana's central role in the Pan-African politics of the 1950s and 1960s, and the pride Ghanaians felt as their nation was the first in Africa to gain its independence in 1957. Akoto's abiding love for Mother Ghana is firmly rooted in this history, and that patriotism continues to be manifest among Ghanaians today. To unpack that larger story and to explore the important role Africans in the diaspora played in shaping the movement in Ghana and beyond, and to also consider the artist's continuing interest in American presidents, our 2 guests and preeminent scholars of Ghanaian art and political history will lead our discussion. What do these Ghana-centric images by Akoto tell us about this story and why Africans in the diaspora were so drawn there? And how do these images speak to Ghana's key role in African independence politics? Dr. Gaines, Dr. Silverman, welcome. We are honored by your participation today and look forward to your discussion.
Thank you, Betsy. Kevin and I have identified a few themes appearing in many of Kwame Akoto's paintings that speak to his identity as an Asante, a Ghanaian, and as a citizen of the world. To begin, Kevin, let me ask you about the importance of images of Kwame Nkrumah as Ghana's first president and a champion of Pan-Africanism. One of the major themes in Kwame Akoto's work is the celebration of Ghana as a nation. We can see the artist's pride in Ghana combined with a reverence for Pan-African unity and solidarity. Why do you think these perspectives are so prominent in his work?
Well, thank you, Ray, and thank you, Betsy. I think Betsy said it very well when she said that Ghana played a central role in the history of Pan-Africanism and the history of African liberation from colonial rule. And in a nutshell, Pan-Africanism is a political movement of Africans and people of African descent from the diaspora, struggling against systems of racial and colonial oppression. In the United States, of course, you know, the Pan-African struggle touched on, you know, the US struggle for civil and human rights. In Africa, of course, it was anti-colonialism and the struggle for national independence. Now, another way to think about Pan-Africanism is the idea that there's a shared sense of identity and destiny among Africans and peoples of African descent. And so we see in many of Akoto's paintings, this pride in Ghana's central role in Pan-Africanism, and also this idea of that shared sense of identity and destiny of Black and African peoples worldwide.
Great. So we see in a good number of Akoto's paintings imagery of Kwame Nkrumah. Why do you think he's such a revered figure in Akoto's work? I'm wondering if you might be able to comment on the artist's engagement with his legacy, about his Nkrumah's legacy.
Yes, I mean, we see Nkrumah right there on the cover of Time magazine. And this really sort of illustrates my point. You know, if you go out in the street today and you ask people the names of African heads of state, past or present, they probably couldn't, you know, give you many examples. But in the late 1950s and early 1960s, you know, during this moment of political change across Africa, many Americans knew who Kwame Nkrumah was. You know, he's constantly in the headlines. You could see him there on the cover of Time magazine at a time when magazines had a lot more bandwidth in our culture than they do today. Nkrumah was constantly in the news. He came to the United States several times. He addressed the United Nations in New York. President Kennedy welcomed him to the White House. He also visited African-American communities in Harlem, Chicago, and Philadelphia. And bear in mind, you know, Ghana and Nkrumah loom so large in the imagination of African-Americans because at that time of Ghana's independence in 1957, the United States was still a Jim Crow nation. And there were mobs, you know, trying to prevent little kids from desegregating schools, as the Supreme Court, you know, had proclaimed. So Akoto is really a part of this moment. And like many others, you know, Akoto views Kwame Nkrumah as this dynamic world statesman and a key founder of Ghanaian nationhood. And Nkrumah was, you know, was very committed to Ghanaian independence, but he had a larger vision of liberation. He famously said and repeated, the independence of Ghana is meaningless without the total liberation of the African continent. And so in Ghana, Nkrumah is remembered as a leader who did great things for the country. He expanded elementary education and public health infrastructure, and he pushed for the nation's industrial development. And interestingly enough, he made common cause with African-American struggles. When Ghana had its independence ceremonies, Nkrumah made a point of inviting Dr. King, who was fresh from the success of the Montgomery bus boycott movement. And he made this you know, direct connection between Ghana's independence and African-American struggles for freedom and, you know, the parts of Africa that were still struggling you know, to end colonial rule.
Thanks. Got a quick follow-up question here. How might we view Akoto's portraits of Pan-African figures in addition to Nkrumah, figures such as Nelson Mandela, Kofi Annan, and President Barack Obama as a chronicle of his life and time?
Well, you know, Betsy mentioned that Akoto was born in 1950. So you can imagine he came of age with Ghana's struggle for independence. And, you know, there were struggles going on in South Africa, you know, nonviolent direct action, protests in South Africa, protests in the United States. So I think Akoto sees himself as a product of this momentous period of political change in the history of Ghana and Africa. When, you know, Ghana and Africa loomed large on the world stage. And this is a period when African liberation movements brought to an end nearly a century of colonial rule by outsiders. So the portraits of Nkrumah, Nelson Mandela, the South African anti-apartheid leader, and later the first president of the Republic of South Africa, Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General of the United States, so another great Ghanaian on the world stage. And then also President Barack Obama, who was, you know, the son of a Kenyan nationalist and an American woman. You know, those portraits all show these figures as proud symbols of African modernity and proof that Africa has contributed, you know, world statesmen of the highest order. And here, you know, we see President Obama with his family. This is the first vacation that they took as a family after Obama became president. And it's quite telling that they're touring Cape Coast Castle and learning about that important site where African captives were detained until they passed through the door of no return and were forced to board ships across the Atlantic to plantation societies in the Americas. You can see the somber looks on their faces as they contemplate that history.
Yeah, for sure. Here are a couple of really compelling photographs. I know that you've written on the return of Africans in the diaspora to Ghana during the 1950s and 60s, the period of independence. Would you mind taking a couple of minutes to comment briefly about the role these figures played in the independence and Pan-African movements?
Sure. You know, one of the things that made Nkrumah unique among other African leaders was that Nkrumah actively recruited and invited Black people from the diaspora to come to Ghana and take part in building the new nation. And he was doing this even before Ghana achieved its independence in 1957. Nkrumah invited Black Americans like W.E.B. Du Bois, who we see on the left. And it's really striking. You can see he's in academic regalia, and he's got kente draping his robes. And on this occasion, Du Bois is receiving an honorary degree from the University of Ghana in 1963. He's age 95 in that picture. Of course, Du Bois was one of the greatest American and African-American intellectuals of the 20th century, and very much involved in civil rights struggles in the United States and Pan-African liberation movements as well. Du Bois was widely considered the father of Pan-Africanism. Now, there were many folks who came to Ghana from the diaspora. You know, Nkrumah had actually studied in the United States during the 1940s. And while he was there, he forged these really strong ties with educated African Americans who had an interest in African affairs. And so when he became, or was about to become, the leader of independent Ghana, he called on those connections to recruit Black Americans. And he really recruited people from all over the world. But he felt, because he was committed to this idea of Pan-Africanism, he really encouraged Black Americans with professional and technical skills, doctors, dentists, lawyers, architects, builders. And just to give you a couple of examples, before independence, Nkrumah brought in the economist W. Arthur Lewis, who was from St. Lucia in the Caribbean, as an economic advisor. And he also brought in the Trinidad-born George Padmore as a political advisor. And as you can see from the other photo, many prominent African Americans either visited or resided in Ghana. There we see Malcolm X and Maya Angelou, but some of the others who visited were, of course, Martin Luther King and Muhammad Ali, and many others as well.
Thanks, Kevin. I might just add, as a footnote, Du Bois, in fact, was passed away and was buried in Ghana, in Accra. And also wanted to emphasize that this invitation that Nkrumah extended to Africans in the diaspora to return to Africa, specifically to Ghana, is an invitation that has continued to stand to this day and is re-articulated with each president that has come into office in Ghana. And as a result of that, there is a very large and dynamic repatriate community in Ghana. Moving on to another theme, it seems that Kwame Akoto is, one could say, obsessed with American presidents. What might this fascination suggest about his view of the United States?
Well, if you can look really closely at that image there on the right, in which Akoto has superimposed his face on top of an American flag, it's a little hard to see, but he's clearly expressing the idea that the United States is a great nation. He says, please love America. America loves you. Never hate America. Pray for the peace of America. America is the world and the world is America. So clearly there's a high regard for the United States as a beacon of democracy, freedom, stability, and prosperity that offers an example for the world. Now, to some, this may sound like a stretch, but you know, Kwame Nkrumah modeled his vision of African continental unity in part on the United States of America. Now, Nkrumah was certainly critical of the United States as a Jim Crow society, but he wrote as part of his argument for African continental unity of his high regard for the United States and the leadership of President Lincoln in presiding over the end of slavery and preserving the Union, which made it possible for the emergence of the United States as an industrial powerhouse. And so Nkrumah felt that Ghanaian unity, political and economic unity, would be the springboard for a similar, his similar hopes for Ghanaian development and modernization.
Kevin, what are we to make of Akoto's reverent portraits of such US presidents as Washington and Jefferson, figures often viewed in the United States with contested legacies due to their role as enslavers? Why does he paint Washington and Jefferson, of all people? What might this subject matter tell us about Akoto's investment in American history?
Yeah, these are really fascinating images, and the images, as with many of Akoto's paintings, have text with them. Now, I don't think you're going to be able to read the text behind the portrait of Jefferson that the artist is standing next to in the central photo. But you know, for me, these portraits of Washington and Jefferson raise the question of how might Ghanaians like Akoto view slavery differently than Americans view their history of slavery. And I try to think about this from a Ghanaian standpoint. And what I would say is that from looking out at the issue from Ghana and its history, slavery is a global institution in which some Africans engaged in slave trading, and many other Africans were in turn captured, enslaved, and taken to the Americas by Europeans as enslaved laborers in colonial plantations. So I guess the way I see it is just as it would be difficult for Ghanaians like Akoto to totally repudiate, Asante chiefs and royalty who were involved in the slave trade. It would be really, I think, a lot to expect them to repudiate, a significant part of their heritage. So it seems also that for Akoto, he brings a similar sense of balance and complexity to his view of the American presidents, Washington and Jefferson. And I think he wants to emphasize the best of what they stood for over the worst. And Akoto seems to regard the US as a symbol of freedom and democracy. And if you think about it, the reason that it is such a sterling example of freedom and democracy is because it overcame slavery and segregation and didn't really become a democracy until enslaved African Americans were emancipated and then made full citizens with the ability to be elected office.
Thanks. So regarding this wonderful image of President Barack Obama on the right here, he's depicted here as an Asante royal wearing Asante royal regalia or Akan royal regalia. I find this particularly intriguing. Why do you think he's portrayed Obama, that is Akoto, why he's portrayed Obama as an Akan or Asante chief?
This is such a rich image, and we probably could spend the rest of our time talking about it, unpacking it. I mean, the idea of an American president who really supports Ghana. And you could sort of see it as almost a fantasy of having, an American president who is so strongly committed to Africa and African, progress and flourishing. So, I mean, another way to look at it is that, and we're still seeing this in the United States, Obama's identity remains contested. Obama says that he identifies as an African American, but you're going to find still people who will insist that Obama is not Black, despite the fact that he openly identifies as such. And so really, questions of race and identity, Obama's identity, are just so contested. And what that means is that others, like Kwame Akoto, are free to claim President Obama as they wish, not just as a son of Africa, but to depict him, as we see here, as an Asante chief. And, Obama has always been a figure onto whom observers project their own views about race and culture, for better and for worse. And I think you see an example of this that I think is kind of interesting and quite thought-provoking.
Yeah, I agree with you that we could spend hours unpacking this image. I mean, I have more questions for you, comments and such, but I think we're going to move on to another theme here. And that is one in which we see Akoto celebrating Africans in the diaspora. But a particular group of people, and that is people who we might refer to as cultural icons. To what extent does such imagery deepen our sense of the artist's high regard, again, for the United States? How do these images convey a sense of their significance for Akoto?
Well, here we have this this collage of images. You see Ray Charles in the center in the top on the left, Michael Jackson, a sort of a an after and before dual portrait of Michael Jackson. James Brown saying "Say It Loud," and then Muhammad Ali with a lot of text. Looks like Muhammad Ali is rendered from a photograph of him victorious after one of his fights. And so all of these icons of the Black diaspora are from the United States. And, you know, I think, you know, there's a message here that, you know, one of the things that makes the United States unique is, you know, the presence of African Americans in their political history and in their sort of musical and cultural history. You know, these are icons, all world famous symbols of Black pride, artistry, and excellence, but all of them with a global renown and appeal that really transcends Blackness. I mean, I think Muhammad Ali during his lifetime was the most famous American who was known worldwide. I don't think there was anywhere Muhammad Ali could go that people didn't recognize him. You know, in his heyday. So, as with the paintings of the American presidents, you know, we can look at a couple of these figures as flawed, complicated human beings, and I'm thinking about James Brown and Michael Jackson in particular. But here, as you can see, as with Washington and Jefferson, Akoto celebrates them wholeheartedly.
I'm particularly intrigued with this dual portrait of Michael Jackson. I think you referred to it as after and before, could also be before and after.
Yeah, that's true.
Depending on how you look at it.
Yeah.
But Michael Jackson, you know, is a controversial figure himself, with a contested legacy. To many, a beloved global pop superstar, but to others, a person with troubling personal and behavioral flaws. Do you think that Akoto might be commenting on this fraught legacy in this dual portrait?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think this dual image of Michael Jackson has the effect of acknowledging the changes in his appearance, but also symbolically reversing them, undoing them, you know, depicting Michael not just in the skin tone he was born with, but claiming him as an African. And you know, by virtue of his dress in the lower portrait, where you know, he's rendered with darker skin and natural hair, and the dual portrait suggests a narrative of return, that Michael has symbolically returned to his ancestral African origins, and you know, that sense of return, you know, almost of turning back time, reminds you of that. The cover photo, maybe some of you saw it, that Newsweek magazine chose to use after Michael Jackson's death in 2009. And it was a picture of Michael as a pre-adolescent, as a boy, in the full glory of the skin tone and African features and hair texture that he was born with.
Right. Yeah, and a final question relating to this theme here. I've got a couple of images here. This one of Kwame Nkrumah with Muhammad Ali, and this image here of President Jerry Rawlings and the First Lady, Mrs. Rawlings, with Michael Jackson. It seems that there's a deeper message in Akoto's paintings of these iconic figures like Ray Charles, Michael Jackson, Muhammad Ali, James Brown, and such, then what we might assume is his pride. What might we assume is his pride in these global icons of the African diaspora? How might we further unpack such imagery?
Well, I think, you know, you see the sense of a shared identity and destiny, but also, you know, what's striking about these figures is, you know, you've got 3 musicians and 1 athlete, and they're just as much known for their iconic voices really as exemplars of the global influence of Black expressive cultures. And the other thing is that all of them were associated with Africa in some way. Michael Jackson, there you see him with President and Mrs. Rawlings. James Brown, his music stylistically has been linked to African music, and he of course performed in Africa. Ray Charles, I think he is just kind of a universal symbol of perseverance and sort of the humble roots of genius. He overcame his blindness, and he was widely considered a musical genius. And you may remember he was heard. He lent his unforgettable voice to that 1985 song "We Are the World," which raised funds for famine relief in Africa. We remember Ali as a champion, but he was also an underdog in a lot of ways. He defeated these fearsome boxers, Sonny Liston and George Foreman, and he was an underdog in those fights. But Ali also, took on the U.S. government as a war resister and prevailed. And then in his later years, he battled Parkinson's disease and managed to do so with grace and dignity. He stayed in the public eye despite this degenerative disease, and was in a larger sense undiminished. So they're all figures who show this connection to Africa and this sense of shared identification and this sense of a shared destiny between African Americans, people in the diaspora, and Africans.
Yeah, I just love this photo. You can just see Kwame Nkrumah is ecstatic, just beaming here, having this opportunity to welcome and shake hands with Muhammad Ali.
There you have two people who really rival each other in charisma.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Nkrumah, I've never seen him look so ecstatic.
Yeah,
I mean,
amazing.
Yeah,
that's a wonderful photo.
Yeah. Well, Ray, I have some questions for you.
Okay.
And it has to do with Kwame Akoto's Asante pride. Akoto, and we saw a bit of this in the images that Betsy shared. Akoto also seems to be very proud of being Asante. And that pride is seen in his many images of chiefs and queen mothers, and especially the kings and queen mothers of Asante. So this raises an interesting question. What does the historic pre-colonial institution of chieftaincy play in colonial and post-colonial Ghana?
So let me start with a little bit of history. The centralized polities, the traditional states that we find today, particularly in communities in southern Ghana, were first established as early as the 14th century. The Asante Nation was founded at the end of the 17th century. During the 18th and 19th centuries, Asante grew to dominate much of what is today Ghana until the British colonized the region at the end of the 19th century. Until 1957, when Ghana became Africa's first independent nation, the British deployed an administrative strategy referred to as indirect rule, in which the colonial government formed alliances with traditional rulers, chiefs, and relied on them to implement the policies of the colonial government. As a result, chiefs continued to play an extremely important role in what was then called the Gold Coast Colony. Since independence, chiefs have continued to maintain an important position in Ghanaian society, where they serve as arbiters of civil disputes, as custodians of heritage, and as champions of social and economic development. Many, but it's important to point out, not all Ghanaians have great respect for their chiefs and take great pride in the heritage of the traditional states with which they are affiliated. This is certainly the case with Asante, and Kwame Akoto is an excellent example of an Asante citizen who is very proud of being Asante and reveres its leaders, especially the king or the Asantehene and queen mother. the Asante Hema. And in this series of photos here, we can see on the left his reverence for the three kings of Asante who ruled during the 20th century, Ajunan Prempe II on the far left, Osei Tutu II, who's the current reigning Asantehene, and on the right, his predecessor of Hokowari II. In this center painting here, we see this rather naturalistic painting of Osei Tutu II. And on the right, the former Queen Mother of Asante, Nana Afia Siwa Kobi Ampan, who ruled for almost 50 years before she passed in 2016. This pride is perhaps most poignantly manifest at events called Durbars, at which Asante's deep and rich history is celebrated. These grand spectacles attract thousands, in some cases, tens of thousands of participants. Here, the Asantehene, the Asante Hema, and the paramount chiefs who represent the states that comprise the Asante nation assemble, dressed in sumptuous cloths, wearing gold ornaments, accompanied by attendants who carry political regalia. And these are very important objects upon which the history of Asante are inscribed. And in this pair of images, we see one of these Durbars, a celebration of the 15th anniversary of the installment of Osei Tutu II that I had attended in 2014. And we can see this is just a small section of the people participating in this Durbar on the left-hand side, and Asantehene Otunfuo Osei Tutu II sitting in state on the right. And here at the funeral of the Queen Mother, who, as I mentioned, passed in 2016, we see the Asantehene again sitting in state wearing mourning cloth here, surrounded by his attendants. Very, very powerful images of this deep and rich cultural and historical dimension of Asante that Kwame Akoto takes great pride in. And just a final group of images here, also taken from the funerary rites associated with the Queen Mother of Asante.
So Ray, we don't have much time left, but
right.
I do want to just ask one more question.
Yeah.
I noticed that some of Akoto's paintings, in some of those paintings, he dresses non-Ghanaians in traditional cloth, especially kente, and sometimes, depicting them with regalia associated with chieftaincy, like the wonderful image of Barack Obama that we considered a few moments ago, and kente, it seems, as well as other Asante Akan visual traditions, have come to have a significance far beyond the borders of Ghana. What is that about?
Yeah, so this is actually a fascinating phenomenon there. Kente is probably the foremost of visual imagery that has been used in a lot of different contexts, not only within Ghana, but globally. And these images here that we've seen before are prime examples of non-Ghanaians being dressed in kente cloth. And you, Kevin, addressed this issue to a certain extent when we were talking about the portrait on the left of Obama. For the sake of time, I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time here for some questions. I just want to run through a series of slides that sort of speak for themselves in terms of this use of what is in fact has become iconic or emblematic imagery that goes far beyond representing Asante, goes far beyond representing Ghana, and have become global symbols of Africa and Blackness. And we see here this image from 1998 the visit of then President Clinton and Hillary Clinton to Ghana with President Jerry Rawlings on the left. We see the use of this kente imagery. You might recall that wonderful image of W.E.B. Du Bois at the University of Ghana, having received an honorary degree. These are graduates at UCLA who are wearing kente cloth in a very similar manner. On the right, we see the use of kente cloth here having been appropriated, reconfigured, repurposed, and making other kinds of clothing, formal jacket for the man, and I assume this is a young groom and bride here, and as well as in the dress of the bride on the right. The use of kente here in dolls, the representation of Afro Mickey and Minnie here, again, using this kente cloth. And another subject that we could spend hours talking about is this issue of appropriation that we encounter of this imagery that comes from a very particular part of Ghana that has been appropriated and used within Ghana in a lot of non-traditional contexts, but then has been appropriated really all over the world and reused, repurposed because of its powerful symbolic significance. The Sankofa bird is another example of a Ghanaian image that is used seen now throughout the world. It references the idea of looking back, accessing one's past as a means of moving forward. And you can see it here being used in several different contexts here. Haile Gerima, an Ethiopian filmmaker on the left in his film from the 90s, Sankofa, very recent book by a Nigerian author, and on the right here reference to a school program in Illinois. So at this point, I think we'd like to open things up and see if any of you have some questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, both of you, for the presentation. Was absolutely wonderful and fascinating. I'd like to comment on some of the questions, and I'll read them and open to both of you. One person, Francis Apia, asked if the Fowler is able to bring Almighty to UCLA. And that's a wonderful and appropriate question. When we first began work on the project, it wasn't possible because of the pandemic. It was just virtually impossible for Africans to travel, and especially the university requirements. Exhibition has been extended now till the end of June, and perhaps that is a possibility. I will certainly pass that on to their staff. We have a question from Henry Drool, and he would love to know about the launch of the Pan-African Heritage Museum and carrying forward a revived Pan-Africanism. Any comments from both of you about the launch of this new museum?
Ray, you may be more up to date on that than I am.
Yeah, I don't know a whole lot about it. I did attend some of the early programming relating to the launch of that, and it's I think a really kind of wonderful manifestation of this relationship between Ghana and Africans in the diaspora, in that it's a project that is appears to be a true collaboration that has been being driven as much by Africans in the diaspora as it is by their partners in Ghana. I do not know the current status of the project. I know it was quite ambitious, and a good deal of fundraising needed to happen before the project could be brought to fruition. I wish I knew more.
So the museum is going to be in Ghana, I presume.
Yes.
And where in Ghana? Accra or Kumasi?
I gosh.
I mean, I know that there was a plan to redevelop the Du Bois Center, but
Yeah, which is another initiative. But
yeah.
I know a building was being built in Cape Coast, which
Okay,
was supposed to address Pan-Africanism.
okay,
So yeah.
yeah. Our questioner Henry Druell may be more knowledgeable about.
Then we are, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, I have someone commenting in the chat that it will be in Winneba.
In Winneba, okay.
The Library of Africa, and they so that's an answer to that.
Okay, great.
We also have, I'm sorry, I'm going to scroll down here. We have Francis Appiah also. I'm sorry, I'm having difficulty scrolling these many questions here. Excuse me, there we go. Okay. Francis Appiah also comments on Akoto's painting of the American leaders. And he says, I believe he painted the American leaders for their bravery, but there was that perhaps he had no knowledge about them owning of slaves. That is possible, although I will say that Kwame Akoto is extremely well read, and he keeps up on current affairs and discussions in newspapers. So I don't know. Ray or Kevin, you have any thoughts about that?
You know, I did consider that, but the side that I came down on was that there's no way that he is unaware that these presidents had slaves. He's grown up in Ghana. He's been surrounded by the history, and I would think that he's knowledgeable about that. He's probably been to Cape Coast many times. So I mean, I think that, yeah, I mean, I did consider the possibility that, you know, that he's got a one-sided view of these leaders as great founding fathers and not enslavers, but I just don't think that, I don't believe that he's unaware of slavery and the role in it.
He also mentions, Mr. Appiah, also the fact that Akoto is appealing to American tourists who are buying. So that is certainly, he's a businessman, he knows what sells, and I think that's an important point as well.
I totally agree. I think that that's something that came up in our discussions.
Tom Seligman comments that James Brown had a huge performance in Black Star Square in Accra, and which was hugely popular and well attended. And I think that's important to remember.
Yeah, and there was, you know, I think in 1971 there was the first Panifest, a concert in Black Star Square that brought African American rhythm and blues and pop stars. Even, you know, more people than that. Santana was there, and it was made into a film, a concert film called Soul to Soul, which I'm sure is still out there. Roberta Flack's in it, and Roberta Flack sings "Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child" in one of the slave dungeons in Cape Coast. It's an amazing scene.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think we're at the end of our time here. I thank you so much, Dr. Silverman, Dr. Gaines, for sharing your excitement and your knowledge of this. Thank you, audience, for attending, and I'm going to turn it back to Bianca. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Betsy and Kevin and Ray, for joining us today to further illuminate many of Almighty God's artworks and Ghana's role in Pan-Africanism. It was a fascinating presentation, and I thank you for that. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. This program has been recorded. It will be available immediately on the Fowler's Facebook, and in a few days it will be uploaded to our Instagram and to the website for you to revisit and share as you see fit. We hope that you'll join us again for our next program coming up tomorrow at the Fowler Museum. Details can be found on the closing slide. In the meantime, have a great day or a great night. We'll see you next time. Bye.